Okay, so as Darren said, I'm from Linlithgow Academy. I started working at Linlithgow a year ago, last August, and the first thing that I noted was that there was no girls in the senior classes in the computer science department, not a single one. So this prompted me to attend 2 webinars in April and May this year that specifically looked at gender imbalance in computing science, because we are the worst subject in the Scottish curriculum. I think in 2019, only 20% of higher presentations were female students. So one of the slides that specifically jumped out at me from the webinars was this one here, a quote from John Hattie, where the differences between boys and girls aren't really a concern. There's more variance or differences within groups of boys and within groups of girls. So with that in mind, if you go on to the next one, what was I going to do next with the situation that we had at Linlithgow? So I was passed some information, some readings to do from Peter Donaldson, who I bumped into and was telling him about the issues that we had. And I'm short of time, so I'm just going to talk about the first one. Joanna Good, I particularly like her article because she's a professor at the University of Oregon, but she was a computer science teacher at a large urban secondary school. So she's got first-hand experience of the issues that we face and strategies to try and deal with them. I'm not going to read these all out to you, but basically, if I very quickly summarize her 5 suggested strategies. The first one is to have targeted recruitment, actually go out there and actively seek girls. And there's good reasons for doing that, because it means then that the girls that you do have who have chosen it are not in a significant minority and feel isolated and lose a sense of belonging. The second strategy is to put computing in a context. So when you're teaching a specific concept, is put it into a context that the pupils can identify with, and that includes the girls obviously as well. The third strategy is probably the most difficult, and this is actually one that we'll all identify with, those of us that are computer science teachers. She calls it powerful pedagogy, but what that includes is, firstly, having excellent content knowledge, knowing our subject really well. Secondly, being very pedagogically good and having strategies that can be used to increase pupils' understanding. So, for example, knowing when to use group work, for example, or pupils working in pairs. And then thirdly, and this is where it's more relevant to the gender situation, is having what she calls cultural diversity content knowledge. Now, what that means is, for example, and I identified with this because I have been guilty of this myself, is first of all avoiding perpetuating gender stereotypes, but also something that she calls not privileging the hyper-knowledgeable elite students and giving them basically the stage. They tend to be male, and they've maybe got some programming knowledge because they've been sitting at home, or their dad's a computer programmer, and teachers allow them to take the stage. And what happens is the others in the class look at that person and don't identify with it. So that increases a sense of isolation and not belonging. The fourth one is role models. We've Shona already spoke to us about that. That's important as well. And then the final one, the fifth strategy, is to keep informing your learners about career pathways in computing science, and probably not just your learners, but also the people that advise pupils at course choice time, but also parents as well, if you get the opportunity to do that. So I did some reading, I attended some webinars, and the first action that I took is that I gave out an evaluation form to the S2 cohort from last year. I asked them various questions, and before I put out the form, I ran the form past somebody from the IGBE department in Education Scotland, which basically is looking for gender bias, to make sure that there wasn't any issues with my wording or the questions that I was asking. So if you look on the next slide, kind of surprisingly, to a certain extent, there was a lot of similarities, and you can see them there. For example, they both, boys and girls, both found software development to be their favorite topic. They both identified kind of creativity as a skill that they found the most interesting. Over 75% of pupils agreed that they'd learned skills that would be useful for their future and that they could use in other subjects. However, the differences was when we asked pupils what they would do to improve the course, girls came up with quite different answers to boys. These are just a snapshot, but they kind of were in categories around about these that you can see on the screen. So the kind of stuff that girls wanted was they wanted computer science to be more real life. They wanted the opportunity to work in pairs and groups. They wanted an idea that when they were learning coding, what was the impact of it? And again, it's about putting it into a context. And most importantly, they said that they wanted it to be fun. So the first action, where are we going from here, is that firstly, this is an enormous job, and this kind of relates to Joanna Good's third strategy, is we need to make our course really good. We need to look at what we're teaching, the content. We need to look at how we're teaching it. We need to make sure that we're teaching it in a way which takes account of diversity, that we're not perpetuating any stereotypes. Now, I can't say, and I put this in my first slide, that I'm not an expert. We're really having to work on this. You need time, space, and you need to work with other computer science teachers to come up with this. On the next slide is the other actions that almost, if you like, quick fixes that I'm doing this year. So the role models. I'm going for role models, not so much people who are, you know, the people we know about, like Ada Lovelace. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I'm going for ones kind of closer, like pupils that are now currently studying at uni or doing a cyber apprenticeship or have just started working in industry. I'm continuing that I've already done, but doing more of letting students constantly know about what pathways they can go down in order to follow a career in tech. Where we had the opportunity to avoid pupils feeling less isolated and to encourage a sense of belonging, we've rearranged the classes so girls aren't in a minority. So, for example, one of our third year classes has got equal numbers of boys and girls. We make sure that we take part in competitions. Last year, we actually had a girls' team that got to the semi-final of the Cyber First competition. We're going to continue that. We do the competitions that Tony puts out. And I've encouraged the girls to take part in the Ada Lovelace Festival. We're also trying to put it into context. So, for example, I'm working with our primary cluster teachers on a coding activity that's centred around about COP26. And then finally, we're going to try to actively recruit girls. I'm going to go into maths classes because my PT is a maths teacher, and actually make a point of introducing computer science and saying what kind of future they could have if they study it. And that's me.